What's up, Team 116? How has everyone's week been going? We are in our Teens in the OT series, looking at some teenagers of the Old Testament. We've looked at Rebecca, who showed us a wonderful example of what it looks like to serve the least of these, as Jesus expects. And we've looked at Josiah, who showed us the impact one teenager can make on a whole nation when they commit this time right now to growing their faith and building their relationship with God. Well, how many of you are fans of Batman and know the villain Two-Face? This week, our example is Joash. And when I look at Joash, especially compared against Josiah, I think a bit about Two-Face. But I'll explain that in a little bit. A bit of fair warning. Because I'm guessing, like Josiah, most of you have either never heard of Joash or very vaguely remember him, like maybe by name and that's it. So if you go off on your own to look up Joash, you can get confused a bit because there are actually two different Joashes. The Israelites by this point had split themselves into two nations, Israel and Judah. Both Joashes were kings, one of Israel, one of Judah. And on top of that, their times as king actually overlap a little bit. So if you want to go read about Joash on your own, please do. I'm not stopping you. I would encourage it. But just realize that if you start getting confused, it's because you might be doing it wrong, trying to put both of them together as one person.
Fusion! Ha!
Wow, that doesn't work. The Joash we're going to look at is the one who was king of Judah. Now, if you thought Josiah being king at 8 years old was crazy, Joash was made king at 7 years old. But unlike Josiah, we're not introduced to Joash when he becomes king. We're actually introduced to Joash when he's around 1 year old, maybe even a bit younger, and it's a pretty harrowing intro. Joash's great-grandfather was King Ahab, who is one of the most evil kings written about in the Bible. And if you remember your Bible, and the time when Elijah had his famous throwdown with the false gods' priests and called on God to bring fire down on the mountain, that was in front of King Ahab. Additionally, Joash's great-grandmother was Jezebel, one of the most evil queens written about, who was on her conquest to kill all of God's prophets. Well, Joash's grandfather and father both became king after Ahab, both following closely to Ahab's evil ways. But after Joash's father was killed, the intensity really picked up. Joash's grandmother, Athaliah, proceeded to destroy the whole royal family of Judah, to kill all the royal heirs, all her grandsons who could claim the throne, and she was almost successful. But she missed one.
Missed it by that much.
Oh, you were so close, Athaliah. Fortunately for Joash, his aunt Jehosheba was married to the high priest Jehoiada, and Jehosheba was a godly woman who found out about her mother's plan. So she snuck her infant nephew Joash and his nurse into a bedroom in the temple, hiding them in safety from her mother, from Joash's grandmother, from the evil Queen Athaliah, while she ruled for the next 6 years. Joash was protected, provided for, and taught about God by his aunt and the high priest, all while high priest Jehoiada was also planning his opportunity to make Joash king, as was his royal right. And in the 7th year, Jehoiada sent for the commanders of units of 100 and had them brought to him at the temple of the Lord. He made a covenant with them and put them under oath at the temple of the Lord. Then he showed them the king's son. So after revealing Joash to the commanders, they together revealed and crowned Joash as king to the people of Judah, while the commanders killed Queen Athaliah, removing her from her unrightful place on the throne. Now, if you remember, Josiah, when he was made king, was described this way. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and followed the ways of his father or ancestor, David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. And Joash, at first glance, looks to be described similarly. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years of Jehoiada the priest. And in fact, if you look at the early years of Joash's reign as king, you might even see them as being really similar to Josiah's. Because sometime later, Joash decided to restore the temple of the Lord. And if you remember, Josiah also led a restoration of the temple. So, why are we talking about Joash if he's basically the same as Josiah? Well, it's because while he is described just a little differently, it is a very key difference, especially when you see them put together. See, Josiah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, not turning aside to the right or to the left. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years of Jehoiada the priest. Josiah is described as never turning off God's path, while Joash is described as only following God's path while his spiritual advisor, his father figure, his mentor, was alive to help him. We are never told that Joash sought God like we are told with Josiah. In fact, we are told that after the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he, Joash, listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and worshipped Asherah poles and idols. Although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back to him, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. So how does any of this relate to you? Well, let me ask this question. How easily could someone, a group of people, lead you to flip who or what you put your faith in? If the people guiding you right now, your parents, your mentors, your preachers and youth leaders, if all of those people were gone from your life, would you follow God or would you flip? Can you claim that you have your own faith in God, or is your faith in God based only on the advice, teaching, and guidance of those around you? If your faith is that of your parents or your ministers or your mentors, you risk becoming a Joash once those people are gone. And at some point, they will be gone. People die. People move. People lose touch. At some point, you will be without them. What will you do when that happens? What choices will you make? Until you make your faith in God your own, until you own it, you are riding that fence between God and not God. So I've got something I want you to try. All you need is a chair with a sturdy back, the footboard of your bed, something that has an edge you can sit on, and bonus points if you have an actual fence that you can use. And you're going to simply sit on the edge, just like I'm showing you here. That's it. No extra tricks. Just sit there. But I want you to try and sit there as long as you can. See how long you can handle it before you choose to move off to one side or the other. Because that's what riding the fence on owning your faith is like. You might not be in a position yet where you feel like you have to choose. But have you prepared yourself? Are you preparing yourself for that time so you will confidently step off the fence to a certain side? Or are you playing a game of chance with your faith? See, I mentioned the Batman villain Two-Face at the start. Two-Face doesn't have any conviction about his choices. He follows the whims of a coin that he flips. Even when he was more Harvey Dent, he was always riding that fence of, is he Harvey or is he Two-Face? Joash gave us a sign of his lack of conviction, owning his faith while in his early years as king. Because even though he had the temple rebuilt, the high places, however, were not removed, and the people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. So Joash had God's temple rebuilt, but he still left all the places to the false gods in place. That's riding the fence. If you recall, Josiah had them all destroyed. That's conviction. This lack of conviction directed Joash's life, to the point that then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest. He stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you." But they plotted against him, and by order of the king, they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. See, Joash, who was protected, raised, and taught by the high priest as his adopted father, basically, He eventually followed the whims of the people and killed the son of his adopted father, who was also a prophet of God. And he killed him in God's temple. So whose example do you want to follow? Josiah or Joash? Both crowned king as young boys to lead a nation of people who had not been following God. One spent his teenage years seeking God and growing his faith. One spent his teenage years being taught about God, but didn't seek God or develop his own faith. One not only stuck true to God, but led his entire nation to do so. One was easily manipulated and swayed, leading his entire nation back away from God. Don't waste these years thinking you'll figure life out later. Determine what kind of person, what kind of Christian you want to be. Spend these years growing into that person. Or keep riding the fence. It's your choice. But just remember, eventually, everyone gets off of that fence to one side or the other. Are you going to set yourself up to choose which side? Or are you just going to follow the whims of who's around you? Ask questions of each other, guys. Help each other. Share with each other. And until next time, team, remember the verse that you wanted your youth group modeled after, because it is not a ride the fence verse.